The death of a young mother in a tiny Hudson Valley town leads to secrets and unsettling truths. It's both a gripping mystery and a portrait of a family struggling through tragedy, trying to put the pieces back together. This is I Dreamed of Falling. Welcome to Between the Covers. I'm Ann Bocock. Julia Dahl is the author of 5 novels, including The Missing Hours, Conviction, Run You Down, and the Edgar Award finalist, Invisible City. She's a former reporter for CBS News and the New York Post. She currently teaches journalism at NYU. Her new book is equal parts family drama and gripping mystery story. The title, I Dreamed of Falling. Julia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This book is a family story.
Right.
It's a mystery. The way I interpret it, it's a mystery to solve inside of a family story. We don't spoil anything in here, but so give us a peek into the story as much or as little as you are comfortable with.
Right. Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, so I Dreamed of Falling is the story of Roman Grady, who is the only reporter in a tiny Hudson Valley town. And his girlfriend, the longtime girlfriend, the mother of his son, is found dead on a hillside. The police immediately think it's an overdose. She's had some drug problems. Drugs are a problem in the area. And he, though, thinks that's not what happened. So as he starts to investigate how she died, he also learns that she was keeping a lot of secrets and that pretty much everybody in his tiny little town is also keeping a lot of secrets. So this book is the story of him and his family dealing with her death, but also trying to figure out what actually happened to her.
There's nothing like small town and secrets for a mystery novel.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Exactly. And it really, in some ways, what inspired this book is my moving from the big city, New York City, to this tiny town. I live in a little town called Cornwall-on-Hudson. It's 3,000 people. And I grew up in Fresno, California, which is, it's no New York City, but there's 500,000 people there. And my high school had 3,000 people. So all of a sudden I'm in this tiny little town and I don't know people, but I start, walking around, and I'm always inspired as a writer by where I am. Just in New York City, it was so easy. There's a story on every corner, right? But in the small town, the vibe is just so different. And I start walking around and meeting people. And one of the things that I realize about a small town is that, first of all, so many people living there now, their generations had lived there. And there was this sense that I felt that you can't really outrun who you were, who your parents were, who your grandparents. I mean, if your grandpa got a DUI in 1958 and crashed into the general store, people are still talking about it, 50, 80 years later. And so there was this sense of I've always had the opportunity, because I've moved a lot, and to sort of reinvent myself. And when you live in a small town, you're just burdened by whatever is past, good and bad. And so I started thinking about a family that had lived in this town for multiple generations and had some ugliness in their past, and the way that really pulled them down, and even when they tried to escape it, they sort of couldn't.
As someone who grew up in a small town, I relate totally to this. The first page of the book is in Ashley's voice.
Yes.
She is the mother who you've already said is
she's found dead,
she's
like
found
the first
dead.
chapter. Yeah.
I think this is a good starting point. If you would indulge us and read that first page
I would be
to
happy
us,
to.
please.
Yes, the book is mostly told from the point of view of Ashley. It's the one who dies. The book is mostly told from the point of view of her, the father of her children, her partner, and his mother. But there are a few chapters in Ashley's points of view. So this is how the book starts. Chapter 1. I hadn't planned to go anywhere that night. Tara made mac and cheese on the stove, and I watched Octonauts with Mason until she called us in for dinner. It was just the 3 of us, me, my son, and his grandma. Mason's dad, Roman, was in the city, and Tara's fiance, John, was working late. We finished eating, and I washed the dishes while Mason and Tara built Lego spaceships in the living room. I opened a beer and scrolled through my phone. When I heard Tara say, "Time for bed," I met them at the bottom of the stairs. "I'll do bedtime," I offered. "I want Gertie to do bedtime," said Mason, touching Tara's leg. "Mommy can do it tonight," Tara said. "No." I wasn't going to make him say more. I knelt and opened my arms. "Can I get a good night?" Mason gave me a big hug, both arms. "Good night, Mommy," he said. He kissed me on the cheek. "Sweet dreams, baby. I love you." "I love you too." I watched them walk up the stairs, his rejection scratching at my heart. In the kitchen, I finished my beer and was about to open another when the text came in. What else did I have to do? It was 8 o'clock on a summer Friday night. Why not distract myself from the fact that my child loved his grandmother more than he loved me? I wouldn't always be like this, I told myself as I put on my new sandals, the ones I bought because I knew Roman thought ankle straps were sexy. Soon, everything would be different.
Soon, everything would be different. That's an
True.
understatement.
It's an understatement. Yes.
The family dynamics in this book are really interesting and really complex.
Yeah.
There's Roman and Ashley, the parents of Mason. There's Roman and Tara. Tara is his mother. There's Ashley and Tara. And guess what? Every one of these characters is flawed.
Very,
and I like that.
Yeah.
I really do. How do you approach creating such complex relationships?
Really, this book started with, I actually heard, you guys have all heard of Sally Rooney. I listened to a podcast with her recently on it, and she said this, and I was like, I do that too. And she said that a lot of her books start with a relationship. And this book really started with a relationship between a mother, Ashley in this case, who has a child young. She's financially insecure. It was an unplanned pregnancy. And she gave birth, the backstory in the book is that she gave birth during the COVID lockdown. So she was alone in the hospital. She had a traumatic birth. Nobody was there with her. And the legacy of that for her was severe postpartum depression. So when she comes home, she really kind of can't take care of her child. So her mother-in-law steps in and says, let me do it. Because her mother-in-law also had had a child young and was a terrible mother. And so this book is about the mother-in-law she wanted to take over with the grandson and kind of make up for her mistakes as a mother. And Ashley, because she's, again, kind of young, and let's be honest, any of us with children know, taking care of a newborn and an infant and a toddler is really hard. And it's exhausting, and it's often really boring, and it's just not, a lot of people are not built for that. And Ashley has the opportunity to sort of say, all right, you take care of him. I'll go back to my regular life, and I'll not do this really hard thing. So Tara takes over, and immediately, they're living in the same house. And friction begins. Who's the real mom? Who does Mason go to? And as you see in this chapter, now, after 4 years, Mason goes to grandma because Ashley has sort of relinquished control, but she's starting to feel like, wait a minute, I want that back. I messed up. I want to be mom again. But that's not easy.
And there's a lot to read about that. I mean, I'm glad you pointed out they all live in the same house.
Right.
That really changes the dynamic.
Right. And you see that a lot. There's a lot of families that live, especially, and this family lives in a small town, which is changing a lot. So, and that happened a lot in the Hudson Valley, certainly during COVID, right? So people from New York City who had money were like, we're getting out of the city, we're gonna come up here. And the housing prices went way up, and all these houses that maybe were kind of falling apart now are these beautiful $1 million mansions. And Ashley and her partner Roman, they all live in this kind of falling down house because it just works for them, right? None of them they don't have a ton of money. The child care is all together, and the friction is evident, right? And and one of the things that I was really thinking about as I was writing this book was the legacy, not COVID that couple years, but the legacy of COVID and the way that it has affected so many families, because so many families dealt with it so differently. You had people who were like, I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm going to the bar. And other people who were like, you will not come near me without an immunization. And sometimes they lived in the same house. And the friction there, I think we will still be living with for a long time.
I want to talk about Tara because she is, and we're not mincing words, you already said it, she was a terrible mother.
Yeah.
Now she's 45 and a grandmother.
Right.
I mean, she's at the same age where people are having
I have a
toddlers.
9-year-old and I'm about that age. Yeah.
Her entire world now is Mason.
Yeah.
It's like she's making up for for being such a horrible mother to her own son.
Yeah.
Exactly. And mothering is hard.
It's so hard, and and yet some people, and I think Tara exactly, when she had the child herself she had Roman when she was 18, not prepared, not a real partner, and she just couldn't handle it. But now she recognizes, as a lot of us do as we get older, really family is everything. And being given the gift of getting to raise another child in a time when she's now mature in herself, she's no longer a teenager. To her, it's like the greatest gift that's anyone's ever given it. And she is not going to screw it up for a second. She is going to, she's the mom or the grandma that is on the floor playing trains. I mean, how many of us have on the floor with the 2-year-old, let's play trains. That's not, for a lot of us, fun, but for her, she just loves it. And we don't watch TV when grandma's around. We're going on a hike. We're going to draw. We're going to read together. And so she is an amazing caretaker to this little boy. And that's one of the things that we sort of talk about in the book, is that Mason really is who he is because he has this amazing grandma. His parents are kind of screwed up.
They are. No, his father, Roman, he's the local news reporter.
Right.
This is not exactly a glamorous job that he has. I mean, he's covering the opening of a store, or it's a job. It's not the job he wanted.
Exactly. So Roman is in his early 20s. He went to college to be a journalist and won a fellowship to go out to Los Angeles and work at the LA Times. And then his girlfriend got pregnant. He decided, okay, he loved her. They love each other. We're going to have this baby. And so he took a job as the only reporter in this little town. And he does things like go take pictures at the bench dedication, right? And he has to go to the fun run and the school board and and interview the local guy who's turning 80 and that kind of stuff, which is not what he wanted to do. And it's not what his friends from school are doing. They're out in hospitals covering COVID. They're overseas covering war. And he's like super depressed. He's stuck. He is stuck, yeah.
You worked at CBS. You worked at the New York Post. You were a reporter. I'm looking at Roman's job. Yes, it is journalism.
Right.
So did you draw on your experience to develop him, even though they're totally different worlds?
Yeah, in a way, almost all my books have some element of journalism in them, because I was a journalist. I teach journalism. I am so passionate about journalism. I call myself a journalism evangelist because I think it is the fourth pillar of democracy. Everything falls apart if we don't know what's going on, right? And that's journalism. But the media that now sort of employs all journalists is really falling apart in so many different ways, and it has been for a generation. And so the media I came into in 1999 doesn't exist anymore. And the jobs are hard to come by, and they're badly paid, and they're insecure. But the thing that's really devastating, I think, to our society, to our democracy, is that local news, like the local paper, right? There were tens of thousands of those, and in the last 25 years, like 70% of them have just gone. So if you live in a small town, or even a medium-sized town, there's no local paper. Maybe there's a stringer from the Miami Herald that works your area, but they're not attending every school board meeting and every planning board meeting and every zoning board meeting, and they're not keeping the mayor honest, right? There's just nobody to do that.
Well, that begs the question. In addition to being an author, you're teaching students, you're teaching journalism, and like you said, things have changed from when you were, things have really changed from when I started.
Yeah.
What do you see ahead for your students?
Well, I do see that the skills of learning how to be a journalist, right? Learning how to get information, take it in, and then spit it out in a way that is without jargon, get in difficult, scientific information and translate it into something that is useful and factual that everybody can read, learning how to do research, learning how to interview people, learning how to write succinctly and clearly. Those are skills that you can use in a million different places. And many of my students really want to work for ProPublica and the New York Times and NPR and PBS and, speak truth to power and shine light in the darkness. And that's why they're doing what they're doing. But they also know, and we talk about this now a lot in school, is that those jobs are hard to come by. And when you get them, they pay very badly. And, you know, usually you're free, you know, you're full-time freelance, right? Like for years I was at CBS and I was a full-time freelancer. I mean, I was there every day, but that's just sort of how it is. And for a lot of people, that's okay because they go into it like a nurse goes into her work, or a teacher, or a social worker, or even like a minister or a rabbi. You go into it because it's your calling. You feel like this is what I am born to do. This is the thing that for me is like the moral choice. I'm good at this. But, you know, maybe it's chews you up and spits you out. I mean, so many of the people I've worked with over the last 25 years are now in communications, public relations, marketing, advocacy, I mean, politics. There's a lot you can do with those skills. So I try to teach the students the skills, but also talk frankly about, all right, well, if you can't get a job here, maybe you can get a job there.
What's interesting is that you teach most likely 20-somethings, and this book is full of 20-somethings.
Yeah.
And your characters are really authentic. And I said the same thing with the last book, in the Missing Hours.
Right.
There was this age
Yeah.
person.
Right.
My take is that you are unfolding this backstory. We're seeing their quirks and their flaws. And maybe because you do teach this age, you like have an in.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is just, and you know, humans are humans, right? We all have a mom. We all have to get up every day and make money. We all, you know, I mean, in some, when we're all struggling with cell phone addiction and you know, the global warming and all that, you know, all this sort of just stuff, family drama, all the stuff. But it's true that I love teaching because I'm now in my late 40s, right? And but I don't want to get old, right? I always want to know what's going on because the new generation is different. It just says I was different from my parents and them from their parents. And it's so invigorating and important for me to be in touch with that and learn from them. And I really, you know, a lot of people say, oh, this new generation, they're so lazy, they're this and that. I totally disagree. I mean, of course, there's bad apples and everywhere, but I feel like the students I meet, and again, you know, they're self-selecting for wanting to be journalists, so they're already sort of just people who are curious and excited about the world, but they have so much interesting perspective on the world. They have so many stories they want to tell. They are so much more worldly and broad-minded than I was at their age, and
that
I
is
love
very
it.
encouraging.
It really, I feel, you know what? When I left the newsroom, I was kind of depressed. It was, I think, 2018, and I'd covered crime and justice, right? So I mean, every day my life was, you know, was all crime and shootings and the worst in the world, and just being in a newsroom had started to wear on me, and I started teaching, and my worldview changed. It made me a happier person. And it made me think, okay, it's not all just bad news. There are young people that want to change the world, and they are in some ways smarter than we are. They know so much.
Julia, can we talk about my favorite character in the book? And that would be Mason.
Mason.
He's 4 years old. Was your son close to that age when you started writing? I mean, you've got him nailed down.
I know, I do. So Mason is right. So Mason's 4 years old. My son was a little older when I started writing. He's 9 now. He was probably 5 or 6 when I started writing this. But yeah, I mean, but I don't think I could have written Mason had I not had a little boy that I knew so well. And I do. I love him too. And I you know, being an slightly older mom, when I was pregnant, they called it a geriatric pregnancy. It is what it is. But seeing him listening to his voice and the questions he asks and the things that he's scared of and things that he's not scared of is, again, it's like you just see the world through a whole new lens. And so I allowed myself to, he wasn't as big a part in some of the first drafts. I mean, he was there because he's the child of the main characters. But I quickly came to realize that, and this is true for everybody, right? Like that your children teach you so much, and that, you know, because they don't have the filter of all the years of experience and in some ways ugliness, but also beauty. They say it like it is. You know, it's very hard for at least most of the children I know to lie. Like they're going to tell you how they feel, and the family he's in, Tara and Roman, are lying to themselves and each other a lot. And Mason comes in, and he is he's like the truth teller, and he's like, this is terrible, guy. You know, that he forces them to deal with the situation and the emotions at hand, and that became a really fun thing for me to write about.
I love Mason. I really did. In the book, there are themes of regret, and there's this possibility of forgiveness that really do drive the plot. Is that something, and this is more of a crafting question, I guess, is that something that evolves as you are writing, or do you go in there with that mindset?
I go in with, there were some themes I wanted to go in. You know, I always write sort of mystery thrillers, and I always know, like in this one, I knew who died, and I knew who did it, and I nominally knew why, but I had no real idea how I was going to get there. And in some ways, that makes it makes writing the book a longer process. I have a folder of outtakes. I never delete anything. So I'll write and write and write, and then, you know, this book is like 75, 80,000 words, and I think I have 60,000 words of outtakes, right? Because you have to just write through things and go, well, that's not right, but I just learned something, so I'll pull that there. So the themes I was thinking about with this book definitely were regret and can you make up for past wrongs against people, and can you forgive people for really wronging you? And what does that forgiveness look like? And if there's not forgiveness, can you still move forward even if that pain is always there? So those were things I definitely was thinking about because I knew the rough contours of this family, but how exactly it would play out came in the writing.
I know you don't sit down and go from page 1 to page 300 and that's it.
Right.
But how do you start?
Right. Oh, that's such a good question. I do start knowing, you know, somebody's going to die and here's who did it and why. But I have a lot of false starts. This book actually did start with Ashley. I knew I wanted a moment of her sort of having a moment where, you know, her son rejects her and she feels the sting of that. Because that was going to be sort of the primary motivating factor in her life and the thing that kind of comes out in part of their family. But I think in the writing, I have tried to outline. You know, I've tried to sit down and be like, okay, this chapter is going to be this. And I just get so bored. You know, I'm like, I just want to write. I want to be in these people's head. I want to write. I recently heard the author Chris Whitaker, who wrote a book you should all read called All the Colors of the Dark. I think it was a Jenna pick this year. It was just a beautiful book, and I heard him talk about his writing process, and he said that his first draft is always just dialogue. And I haven't done that, but I'm writing a new book now, and I'm thinking about that a lot because really writing scenes between people is how you move things forward. How people interact with each other and who says what and what the tone is and what's not said are for me, how I figure out how these people, how they tick and what makes them do what they do.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it.
know,
I
right?
don't think I've ever heard that
Me
before.
neither.
As the author, you already know who the victim is and who did it. But there is this challenge in writing mysteries of connecting the dots without giving it away.
Yes.
Does that take time?
Yes. The first book I wrote, Invisible City, was in some ways easier because I wrote it, I didn't have a contract, I had no idea if anybody would ever read it, and I was kind of just playing. But each book I write afterwards is a different challenge because I'm always sort of trying to write a whole different kind of book. I did have a series of 3 books, but they're each very different because frankly I just got bored. One of the things that's a real privilege about being a published author is that I have an agent who is brilliant and I have an editor that I've been working with for 10 years who's also brilliant. So I can go to them and say, give them drafts, have problems and say, can you help me with this? And my second novel I sent to my agent, and she said, you've got a big problem here. The problem is that your reader knows plot points that your characters don't, and that's very frustrating. And the minute you say it out loud, you're like, oh yeah, of course, right? Like if you're reading and you know that something happened, but the character hasn't found it out, you're like, ugh, can we just keep going? So that was something I learned, that you have to make sure that your characters are caught up with your reader, right? So that the reader doesn't get bored. And one of the things I've started thinking about with a mystery novel is something that I call the arc of suspicion, right? So as you're reading a mystery novel, you sort of know, okay, well, I'm going to find out who did it. First, oh, I think it's this person. Oh, wait, now I think it's this person. Oh, I think it's this person. And so thinking about it in a visual way has helped me a little bit think, okay, well, as I'm writing, okay, by 75, I want the arc of suspicion to have changed. And then at page 200, I want it to be here. And it's not till, 285 that we get to the main character. And that kind of, those tricks come after, I've been doing this for getting on 15 years. But, and each time I learn more and more.
How do you know when you're done? And other than a publisher has said, you have a deadline,
right.
we need the manuscript.
Yeah.
But how do you know? Because you could keep
Right.
rewriting forever.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is actually one of the reasons that I tend to write murder mysteries, because at some level there's a built-in, at the beginning somebody dies, at the end you figure out who did it, right? And yeah, you could go on and on forever. And actually my fourth book, The Missing Hours, is my only book. It's a thriller, but it's not a murder mystery. And ending that was an absolute nightmare. I was like, I have no idea where this book ends, because you need to find something that's satisfying. But of course these characters' lives go on. They could go on forever. They could go on for 10,000 pages, right? But you want to find an end that feels like a whole, and it comes from theme. The theme of, for this one, it was, can you forgive and can you get over regret? And I felt like the final scene in that, there's a sense of like, there's going to be a moving on. So often it comes back to theme. And all my books, I actually have thought about this recently because I was looking back at them, all of my books have ended on a line of dialogue. I like that because I like the idea of going out with someone speaking, that the conversation continues potentially.
The new book by Julia Dahl is I Dreamed of Falling. Julia, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you.
I'm Ann Bocock. Please join me on the next Between the Covers.